another difficult one for the government. So we'll see how that vote goes tonight. If any MPs were wondering what David Cameron, the former Prime Minister, thinks of this all, we caught up with him today, and he attacked those who want Brexit but didn't vote for yes. Yeah, or you can, yeah. That's fine. Fine. Do you want to thank me at the end, or kind of like go? Okay, tip. Yeah, I think he is, but you know, I was yeah, it's really good. Normally,
say it's literally none of the countries. My speaking arrangements. Not say anything. Don't like it. Shit. Next time. Everyone with a star. I'll say that every night, but I think everybody has to be honest. It's really not their
Somewhere else. No one ever said anything about it.
The Prime Minister's deal. Can you explain the deal going down?
Mr. Cox! Stop! We got it. Look at it in a smile. Guy called Paul. Oh, that's love. See the tears coming. Greg, Greg, your ladder as well.
Oh yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. I do like one of those. You don't get cross. Big tears when
Why the two of us? I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine.
Nice, isn't it? They are. Normally get breaks. Yeah, like I put it to slightly now. Sorry, to damage it, I will do whatever they tell me to do. It's up to them, it might be. Might be lucky. 11. Apart from me. The other side doing it. Not because it's inside. I do the back it outside. Just to like do something. That's the thing. And just like getting things pointless to me. And just like, what's she gonna do? Like come up to me and answer my questions or something, become my best friend. That would be a mistake. Yeah. funny actually, like, I guess the guy who's been here for ages helped us too, but it's like, we meet these politicians, like we met Matt Hancock when he had his first kind of job, he was the Minister of Portsmouth, and I was working down in Portsmouth when I first met him, and like Penny Morgan was also MP for Portsmouth, we went like on some like press sailing expedition together. So weird. Yeah, I've seen her shuffle into a dry suit and a wetsuit, let me tell you, that was something. Yes. Yeah, yeah. I didn't get wet, so that was the main thing. Did I get on a boat? I think I did get on a boat, but I didn't sail it. I just had to film. I didn't even do fucking risk assessment on that. I was just holding the camera on some rib. So we could bring contact. Get it tested in the office. And then I'd have to bring it with us. That is the one thing about where we are. Oh my god, yeah, yesterday there was, no I wasn't, I was off, but I went for lunch with someone and literally the minute I was about to check out, it was like the heavens opened, I was like, oh no. It would have been so miserable. Especially it was like a really wet rain as well yesterday, so it just kept everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, it was quite wet for a bit. Mine too. I like that spot at the bottom. Yeah. Quite nice sheep. Yeah. Remind myself of the question. Get with it. Has Brexit been taken out of your hands? So literally, out of my hands.
Now 3 years. And so when I pulled off, I tried to see the knee, it's underneath the knee, it got to a belly, to a back, it's in every nook and cranny. A lot of cranny does have that.
9 days, right? 5 days left.
I got through the whole pack, and I didn't spare a set of clothes. So I had some advice.
Get around the back.
I mean, I thought you would do a pat though, for like... But that makes it kind of a fine work, isn't it?
Are your feet flat?
They just change up it, maybe.
When I realised I was like, also in the east side. Right. So great.
I'm kind of a big deal.
What's happened?
Oh, I had it on my phone for ages. I just finally deleted it. It's got a bit weird.
Yeah. Huh? Don't want to listen to the time of it.
This one? Can I have that once we're done?
I'll miss the most exciting bit.
You have a citizenship ceremony.
Oh, nice.
I'm Charlotte. Hi.
Stuck with it. Brexit or not?
That's my wife, getting a citizenship ceremony. Cool.
Just a reminder.
Yeah. Thank you. I did 10. I didn't even know what it was. No, right. I didn't really mind, but I was hoping I could see it, but it's not properly there.
morning.
Oh, you said.
Yeah. Packed out. What, so about today? I was at Michael Gove's house. Oh yeah.
Get him?
Well, I got the corner.
He goes, yeah, he normally goes for a run, doesn't he? And then he
Yeah, I thought you guys did.
Were you here at 7 as well?
It's the second paragraph being that you're not so
Well, we've got one back. There's another one here. So.
The other one was my favourite part of that.
So we live recording now?
I like that. Yeah, I do it that way. Makes you feel at home. If you tell him with his phone that only... Hello, Jacob. He's so shocked. He's got his name. Julian,
The free vote. Yeah. Free. Free art. I do most of the application.
similar to mine, I am
I guess. Be here every Brexit.
the month-long
Boring. Excuse me. I've already done that once already. I didn't work well on either ends.
Well,
never a good thing.
I was able to have a catalogue from 7, 8, 8.
Sharp lenses. Are you going to keep your spot here every day? Because I didn't think that your Simon spot was actually yesterday. Just there as a podium. The full camera was in that one. This one. Well, who's doing it? Right. But I said before, they've actually all along had it in here. Do you see what I mean? So I just keep this. I think the time's okay. I think
tomorrow's the development significant.
Yeah, tomorrow's where all of this stuff has to give one way or the other. But the only technical thing, 10 o'clock.
Yeah, I mean, like tonight, there's no pictures. I mean, I only heard them in the car, so I have to do it. That's coming out of Karen's gates.
Oh, down there? Yeah, not here. We'll have someone here. Ours is going to be here.
We'll have someone here as well. She's not there. No, I might as well leave that tonight. Yeah. Just in case, yeah. That's right. That's the worst parade.
Went out that door. That's how yeah.
wheels in the way.
I take that back about the ladder for Andy though, because it's now the same like
I was at the back the other day, and I'm like, oh, everyone's got ladders down here, in May. I'm like, yeah, he's got ladders, he's got ladder. I'm like, oh yeah. You know, I realised it was Daniel, but he didn't have a ladder, he was just the same height. Just moving on the ladder.
Yeah. 11:03. Exactly 10 minutes. Fold in the back of the car. We're starting to rain. Yeah. Well, How hot it was. they're all insulated. They're great. When I wear long ones, I always find it a bit tight, a bit sweaty. So comfortable. I've got mine on that, so you know, you've got to when you're here.
Boiling with nothing.
Yeah. That's something going on the train. You could see dying on the train on the way here. So basically, after this, it's not until that night. Are you just? No, I'm going now. I'm on the early. What are you doing before me? 7 o'clock. Do you need all 4 of you tonight? Is that the logic? Yeah, exactly, yes. I'm taking reading off his hands. That's probably about right, isn't it? I said taking looking at you don't enjoy his hands with 2 over, do you? No, exactly. There we are, we'll do the perfect. It's all right over there though. Yeah, it is, at least the stop. It's lighter there than it is there. I mean, how do you work that out? So you can get really caught out if you try and do Hammond by surprise from here in the same proposal. It's just probably because it's totally white on the wall. It's very odd, it must be, yeah. It's just it's reflecting the light. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it bounces the light back, doesn't it? Oh.
Has Brexit been taken out of your hands, Prime Minister? Are you still in control, Prime Minister?
I felt like we were. It was quick, wasn't it? Yes, it was. Okay, moving over to number 11.
Right, I'm going to go to 11. Who's there? Okay.
I'm going.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the Chancellor's going to go out now.
Simon, are you going to do the right? What?
I'm not going to bother with that.
I can hear you. Yeah.
bit tight, yeah.
Question, Adam. From what happened last night, it would be easy to say no now, wouldn't it, after the Prime Minister lost that second meaningful vote by 149 votes. It really wasn't the outcome that she wanted. But you're right, she's been meeting with her cabinet ministers here in Downing Street this morning, essentially because there is a spring statement this morning. We may have forgotten about that and everything else that's going on, but she was supposed to be talking to them about the financial future of the country, a standard meeting that would have happened ahead of a spring statement, but clearly Brexit was also on the agenda, and Sky understands that in that meeting with her cabinet, the Prime Minister was asked about the idea of a third meaningful vote, another go at trying to get her deal through the Commons. Now this was something that has been floated over the last couple of hours by other MPs, in a sense that the Prime Minister could hope that at some point when all other options have been exhausted, perhaps after today the vote on no deal and then tomorrow perhaps a vote on an extension when MPs had had their say on those issues, that they may be able to come back, bring her deal back to Parliament and hope that they could cut those numbers of people who didn't like it down still further. There were also other conversations today though, and the Prime Minister is in a really difficult position because she's got two sides of her own government, let alone the rest of Parliament, who feel completely differently when it comes to what should happen next. Her Brexiteer ministers want her to give them the opportunity to try out an alternative plan. It's called the Malthouse Compromise. That's essentially something called a managed no deal, leaving without a deal but trying to do it on slightly softer terms, which would involve paying the EU some money to try and get them to agree to that. But there's a whole other wing of her own ministers who want her to try for a softer Brexit, to perhaps look to a customs union or another route to try and get Labour MPs on side for a different deal. And right in the middle is Theresa May. And today, in that vote on no deal, she could lose another key part of her negotiating strategy. She could be about to lose the one thing that she's been telling Parliament all this time is what keeps the European Union coming back to the table, that threat of no deal. And if she loses that, well, it becomes very difficult to see how she keeps a grip on this process going forward and how MPs and her own ministers don't wrestle that control out of her hands. Well, that's right, David Cameron, we caught up with him earlier, and if you listen to the tone of what he says actually in this short clip, it's perhaps what Theresa May is feeling but can't say herself. Just have a listen. Just listen to how exasperated David Cameron sounds there, saying those people who want Brexit, I can't believe they keep voting against it. No doubt that's exactly how Theresa May feels too, but we will see her again shortly in the House of Commons, and her MPs will be hoping that she has some answers for them. Sorry, what was that, Adam? No, we don't know quite yet, but hopefully overnight perhaps she's had a hot toddy or two, got some whiskey on that throat, and maybe it will have improved slightly. But I have to say, the mood in the Commons last night, when she really was losing her voice and struggling to speak, it was absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop in there. The mood was really somber. So perhaps again today in Prime Minister's questions we'll see that same tone from MPs if she really does struggle again. It's really weird. It's really hard to hear. Sorry?
You made perfect sense.
God, it made sense to somebody. It's hard to hear Adam. I think it's the tone of his voice. Do you think, or do you think it's from the studio?
No. He came in, and because you don't expect it. It's actually very complicated. I know I was taking.
Yeah, I hope that was okay to say what you say. Otherwise, I would have just stood there looking like a lemon.
Well, yeah. What I'm saying is, I might not do it like right. Right, I've been told that I'm going.
Okay, cool. Well, I've also been told that I'm going, so that sounds about right.
Excellent. Okay.
It'd be bad if one of us think they were staying. Chancellor hasn't gone yet, has he? How do you like it? Right from hand? I keep saying to the others, why don't we have a trolley? And they're like, no, that's a trolley. Right, I will see you later. Nice to see you. Bye. See you all later.
No, I don't.
How long do you want to give it?
I emailed them, they never got back to me. I emailed them, but like this also did as well. They never got back to me. They're pretty like busy at the time. More like the speed of what's back. Radio silence. Something like that. That's what I found. Yeah, well, we needed it. This
I've never seen you that scared.
Oh yeah, it's pretty antisocial. I feel like he was apologistic enough. Did you see that guy?
From here, I don't think there's anyone left here. That time to wait. Yeah. I'll wait. Okay. You want me to go and tell Chris? Okay, cool. Because I was just next to him. Fine, okay, I'll wait 10 minutes to get back. Cool. Bye. Being relieved. Swap.
Oh, tonight? Yeah. There's the like same shop on the door, 10:30. Yeah, exactly.
Excuse me and indulge me for 30 seconds, Mr. Speaker, just to give my apologies on behalf of my right honourable friend for his absence from the chamber today. I think, as you know, Mr. Speaker, he has got a commitment that has meant that I'm here in his place today. To the honourable lady, I would say that we have published now over 300 items of no-deal content and broadcasts across some 200 commercial radio stations as well. The Cabinet Office is facilitating redeployment of staff between departments and coordinating contingency planning through established structures.
Jill Furness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was announced overnight that the government plans to slash tariffs on the majority of products imported from outside of the EU in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Such a move would mean cheaper steel imports, with business saying this could destroy our steel sector and manufacturing sector more broadly. What consultation did the government have with the steel sector ahead of this announcement?
I would say to the honourable lady that the temporary tariff regime aims to minimise cost of businesses and mitigate price impacts on consumers, whilst also supporting UK producers. And I would stress again, this is a temporary scheme. A business will be consulted over the first 12 months.
Michael Fabricant.
This morning, I and other honourable members and right honourable members were on an SI. Throughout the committee corridors, there are SIs every day almost, Mr. Speaker, preparing not only for a deal Brexit, but a no-deal Brexit. Can I just tell my honourable friend that we are prepared, in my view.
Aren't we? I think was where the question mark comes. Minister, we're grateful.
My honourable friend makes a very good point. As the government has said consistently over the last couple of years, we are working for so that we are prepared for whatever the outcome, and obviously the legislative default at the moment for this Parliament is to leave without a deal if we do not get a deal agreed.
John Trickett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the country is hanging on a no-deal cliff edge. And today we read the government's latest brilliant idea. A ludicrous TV advert saying to the public from Friday onwards, don't panic. A bit like Corporal Jones did in Dad's Army. But this is not the Home Guard in the 1940s, is it? And the prospect of thousands of job losses and the shortages of food and medicine and so on, it's no joke. That's right. And we can prevent this. And today the Commons will take control from the government to prevent such a disaster scenario. Will the Minister be joining us?
Minister!
Well, I find it somewhat ironic for the honourable gentleman who, along with his colleagues, has been talking about preparation and the previous question about preparation as well, and then he's complaining that we're preparing the public for what may happen on March the 29th. And obviously the simple answer would have been he and his colleagues should have voted with us last night to make sure that we left the EU with a deal.
Bambos Chalalambos.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and I regularly engage with unions on a range of civil service workforce issues, including pay. I most recently met with union representatives from across the wider public sector last month, and I will meet civil service trade unions on pay for 2019 very shortly.
Bambos Charalambos.
Since 2010, wages for workers in the civil service have fallen between 10 to 13% behind workers in the NHS, local government and the education sector. Despite this, the Cabinet Office have confirmed that any pay rise above 1% will have to come from further cuts in jobs, terms and conditions. Isn't it time that the government backed up its own claim to be ending austerity by first ending it for its own employees?
Minister Dowden.
Well, as the honourable gentleman acknowledges, we have removed the 1% pay cap, and in fact, it is up to each individual department to find efficiency savings and better ways of working to pay for greater pay rises, and that's exactly what we've seen. Look, for example, at what the Foreign Office did. They agreed a deal of 4.6% on average over the course of 2 years, giving that pay rise, but funded properly by efficiency savings.
David Evaner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend, can he confirm whether in these discussions he's been having, he's reflected on how much the national living wage will increase from next month and how many workers this will benefit?
Minister Dowden.
Well, as ever, my right honourable friend is absolutely correct. And in fact, the effect of the national living wage just this year is to hand workers a £700 pay rise.
Chris Stevens.
Can the Minister confirm then that permanent secretaries agreed a 1% pay offer across the board, across government departments last year? Does that not make a mockery of the fact the government have 200 separate pay negotiations across the civil service?
Well, as the honourable gentleman is aware, in respect of lower grades, that's to say those below the senior civil service, there is a delegated pay process. The overall framework is set by the Cabinet Office and Treasury, and it's for individual departments to decide. We will go through the proper process for that, and no final decisions have been taken.
James Doddridge.
Question 3, sir.
Indeed. Minister Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In December 2018, we launched the £250,000 Enable Fund, which provides grants to help cover disability-related expenses that people might face when seeking elected office ahead of the May local elections.
James Doddridge.
I thank the Minister for that answer. In the past, I've been a trustee of Shields, which stands for Supporting and Helping Everyone with Learning Disabilities in Southend. What plans does the Government have to engage people with learning disabilities in the electoral process?
Minister.
Well, I congratulate my honourable friend. I know he works hard on supporting what Shields do, and they are themselves clearly doing positive work for people with learning disabilities in Southend. We are committed to supporting people with learning disabilities in participating in democracy. We're working to that end in partnership with the Royal MENCAP Society and including facilitating a meeting between MENCAP and political parties themselves regarding the provision of easy read manifestos as just an example.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, perhaps I should declare an interest in it that my own wife is disabled, and I'm glad for her support in my elections in the past. At the last snap election, we had an issue with access to voting stations. Sometimes a school would be declared unsuitable because repairs were being carried out, and another place had to be found for a voting station. Sometimes disabled access was an issue. Can I ask, what is the government doing to make sure that disabled people, it's made as easy as possible for them to get in there and cast their vote?
Well, I think the honourable gentleman makes a very good point. We are working with returning officers on this very issue, and I think there is also that wider issue about engaging with people with disabilities that all of us in all political parties can do more about and should be looking at what we can do to encourage people to get involved. That's why I'm so proud of being part of the Conservative Party, whose Conservative Foundation does exactly that.
Ruth George. Well done. Anyway, yes. Well done. And the Honourable Lady can resume her seat and go on, get into your seat. Well done. Very well done. And the Minister, I'm giving the Honourable Lady breathing time. Breathing time. The Minister will deliver an initial response, and then her question, as she knows, is about the capacity of the civil service to manage its additional responsibilities as a result of the UK leaving the EU. She should have more breath now. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is equipping itself, and I'll take my time to answer for this, with the right people and the right skills to deliver the UK's exit from the European Union. In fact, we now have more than 14,500 people working specifically on EU exit-related policy and programmes across government. Workforce plans will continue to be reviewed to ensure that the civil service can always respond to emerging capacity and capability requirements.
Ruth George.
Much, Minister. And what assessment has the department made of the impact on other departments, many of whom have seen these civil servants transferred across into working on our strategy for exiting the European Union?
Well, I would say to the Honourable Lady, there's over 400,000 civil servants across departments and across the country, many of whom have areas that cross over the work they're doing on the EU, and we work with departments to ensure that we are using the right skills in the right places to make sure that we are prepared to leave the EU in a good and orderly fashion.
Ron Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could my right honourable friend update the House on what measures are being taken to return civil servants that work in the European Union, in Brussels and other parts, to the UK to carry on their duties?
Minister.
Well, I'll say to my honourable friend, obviously, as we leave the European Union, the civil servants who have been focused on those issues will continue to do the work they need to do where it relates to the European Union, and where that work ceases, they will be moved back into the relevant civil service areas as is required across departments.
Ruth Cadbury.
Mr. Speaker, at a meeting of the Cabinet Office in December, it was reportedly agreed that all non-essential government business is to be suspended so that civil servants can concentrate on no-deal planning. Can the Minister confirm whether the government considers the housing crisis, resourcing the Home Office to process settled status applicants, the failure of universal credit and the delays to HS2 to be essential or non-essential business?
Minister!
Well, the best advice I can give the honourable lady is to not get tempted to believe rumours of cabinet leaks as she reads them in the newspapers. But I would say to her, if you look at the track record of what this government has been doing, delivering record employment levels, record low unemployment, improving wage levels for people, work for the government, delivering for people, good and outstanding education continues, and I'm sure she'll look forward to hearing more about that in the spring statement shortly later today.
Oh, very well. Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Compared to 2 years ago when we triggered Article 50, how much more and better prepared are the civil service right across the UK for what needs to happen in the next few months?
Well, I would say to you, Honourable Gentleman, the work has continued over the last 2 years. As he may recall from answers I've given at this dispatch box over the last year or so, the number of civil servants obviously focused on this area has changed and increased as is required so that we are ready to leave the European Union on March the 29th.
Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clear, is it not, that Brexit will mean a lot of change, upheaval and uncertainty for ordinary civil servants throughout the country. So I was genuinely astounded last week to learn from the General Secretary of the PCS Union that to date not a single meeting has taken place with national officers of that union to discuss Brexit. When will this government start discussing these matters with representatives of the workforce it depends upon to deliver services throughout the country?
Well, I'll just say to the Honourable Gentleman, we are engaged not just across the involved authorities, but with union officials, both at ministerial and at official level, on a regular basis.
Helen Hayes.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Chloe Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have a robust legal framework on money and elections to ensure elections are free and fair. Donations to political parties over £500 must be from permissible donors, which include individuals on a UK electoral register, UK registered companies and trade unions, and UK political parties. Responsibility for regulating that sits with the Independent Electoral Commission. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even this week, hundreds of thousands of pounds of dark money is being spent on social media adverts by a pro-Brexit organisation warning MPs not to steal Brexit, with no information in the public domain about who is funding these ads, which are being so heavily promoted at a critical time in the Brexit process and clearly aim to influence it. There is no place for dark money in British politics. The Electoral Commission has been calling on the government for years to take action. Why has this government failed to act? Mr. Speaker, there's been a number of recommendations made in this and related areas, for example, by the Electoral Commission, for example, by the DCMS Select Committee. We are, I think, as would be expected, considering all of those together and will respond in due course.
Sir Nicholas Soames.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a matter of really first-order business for the government, and the electoral system of this country has always been something of which this country has been very proud. And can I urge my honourable friend to really push ahead with the steps needed to control this, because it's clear that on these big issues it's very, very bad news if people really believe that the electoral system has been corrupted.
Hear, hear.
Minister.
My right honourable friend makes a weighty and important point, and he's absolutely right. We should not be complacent about the way our electoral system runs. We are taking a series of measures, have already taken a series of measures to ensure that it is secure, and we will do more of that to ensure that our system is good for today and fit for tomorrow.
Chris Elmore.
Speaker, I think the problem is, Minister, that the government spends an awful lot of time condemning the actions of the press or in other social media platforms, but right now there are social media posts describing members of this House as traitors and asking us to be targeted to make sure we vote a particular way. It's no good us condemning that sort of language in this House if ministers don't take real action now, making election laws fit for now, to ensure that members of Parliament can do their jobs freely and not be intimidated to vote a particular way.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member will have noticed the written ministerial statement I put down only last week, outlining the steps that the government has already taken and will be taking to reduce intimidation in public life. This has to be a collective job, though, and the Committee on Standards in Public Life was right to ask various organisations to take action, including actually the social media companies, which I know he does some work on with one of his all-party parliamentary groups.
Carol Monaghan. Carol Monaghan.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're addressing this issue through the application of the statutory national minimum wage and the national living wage. This is based on the advice of the Low Pay Commission, and from April the national living wage will rise again from £7.83 to £8.21 per hour, handing a full-time worker a further £690 annual pay rise.
Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But the real living wage is £9 an hour, and Scotland is already the best performing part of the UK in terms of paying this. Over the next 3 years, the Scottish Government will be lifting more people, 25,000 more people, out of poverty and onto the real living wage. So when will the UK Government follow Scotland's lead in paying the real living wage, not the bogus national living wage?
Well, I'm sorry to hear the Honourable Lady opposite refers to the national living wage as being bogus. I think it's a very proud achievement of this government. It is actually rising faster this year than the real living wage, and over the past 3 years since it was introduced, it has handed the lowest paid workers a pay rise of almost £3,000.
Alex Burghardt.
Sir.
Minister Dowden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our world-leading national cybersecurity strategy, supported by £1.9 billion of transformational investment, sets out the steps we're taking to defend our people, deter our adversaries, and develop the skills and capabilities we need. Our vision is that by 2021, the UK is secure and resilient to cyber threats and prosperous and confident in the digital world.
Concerned to read that 3/4 of FTSE 350 companies are not aware of the risks associated with businesses in their supply chain, particularly with businesses they have no contact with. What steps is the government taking to ensure that its own suppliers understand these vulnerabilities?
Well, as ever, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this very important issue. Companies must do more to understand their supply chain risks, and our Cyber Essentials scheme extends our influence to those organisations that provide products and services to government. This specifies standards which will improve their cybersecurity, and we use contractual arrangements to ensure they help those in their supply chains, often small companies, to be more secure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Technology can help deliver public services which are better, which are smarter, which are more tailored, and which put people in control. But that requires investment in people, in processes, and in equipment. The 2017 WannaCry attack on the NHS was a consequence of a lack of investment in all three. What is he doing specifically to give local authorities and other public service deliverers the resources and the skills they need to ensure secure digital public services?
Well, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to raise the challenge of cybersecurity, but we have responded to that challenge. That's why we have created a National Cybersecurity Centre funded by £1.9 billion of additional money. And in respect of the WannaCry incident, since that incident took place, we have learnt the lessons from that, and we're, for example, rolling out Windows 10 across the NHS.
Mr. Speaker, we know that 43% of businesses experience cybersecurity breaches each year. And as we've just heard from my honourable friend, we know that half of all local authorities in England still rely on unsupported server software. And we know from the Minister himself that the government have no idea how many cyber attacks hit government. Will the Minister accept that we need a new approach? We need to look at how we foster cultural cyber change, and we need to look at how we put the public good rather than private interests back at the heart of government cyber strategy.
Minister! Well, the Honourable Lady says we have no idea of the level of attacks. I'm happy to actually set out the number for her. We have already managed over 1,100 major incidents through the National Cybersecurity Centre. The National Cybersecurity Strategy is delivering, for example, more than 4.5 million malicious emails removed every month, taking down 140,000 fraudulent phishing sites. This strategy is bringing together the commercial side and the government side, and it's delivering.
We're out of time, but we must hear the Right Honourable Lady's question. Nicky Morgan.
Question 8, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the increasing prevalence of intimidation in public life can seriously damage our democracy, as we were already just discussing. So the government is taking a range of actions to tackle this problem, including a consultation on a new electoral offence of intimidating candidates and campaigners.
Minister very much indeed for that reply. She may have seen the exposure programme broadcast last week, which captured the abuse and threats of death that I have faced, that the honourable member for Edinburgh has faced, and my right honourable former friend, the member for Broxtowe, still a friend. Can the Minister, and the excellent response to the point of order I raised from the Speaker, the systematic intimidation of MPs in this place and the way they conduct the vote should be a real concern to anybody interested in our democracy. Does the Minister agree?
Minister!
Mr. Speaker, yes, I do agree, and the government has therefore been working closely with the parliamentary security team, the police, administrators and others, because tackling this requires action from everybody. But it does also go wider than only members of parliament. For example, we are helping candidates at the local elections this year also be safer with their home addresses.
One sentence. Tom Brake.
Would the Minister therefore commit to conducting a Mueller-style public inquiry into the alleged electoral fraud that has been committed by electronic campaigning by campaigns like the Leave campaign, and of course potentially Aaron Banks, who's being investigated by the National Crime Agency?
And of course the right honourable gentleman is concerned about implications for intimidation, I'm sure, to which the question relates. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman, also ought to know that the government cannot have such an inquiry because the agencies investigating it are independent, and rightly so. But I can reassure the House that we have seen no evidence of successful interference in UK democratic processes, and that is as we would wish it to be.
Topical questions. Henry Smith.
Topical question number 1, sir.
Minister Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, my honourable friend, the Minister for the Constitution, updated the House on actions we are taking to tackle the inexcusable intimidation of people in public life. We have legislated so candidates in local elections now have the choice to remove home addresses from their ballot papers, and have consulted on new electoral offence for intimidatory behaviour. But it is vital that everyone in this room works together to prevent this worrying trend.
Henry Smith.
My constituents rightly care about the security of their ballots. Can I have consideration of Crawley being a future voter ID pilot?
Minister.
My honourable friend makes a good point, and we will be looking carefully at the evaluations from both the 2018 and, when they come forward in a few months, the 19 pilots, to help inform our next steps and to shape how the final policy will look when introduced. We could to benefit from close collaboration with local authorities and would welcome the involvement of Crawley as we progress.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been reports that the Conservative Party is preparing to take part in the upcoming European elections, and now the opposition has heard that on Monday there was a telephone conference between the Cabinet Office and regional returning officers, who of course would run such an election, at which preparations for European elections were discussed. Is the government saying one thing in public and another thing in private?
Again, I would say to the honourable lady, as I said to her colleague earlier on, to not believe every rumour she reads in a newspaper or on Twitter. It is simply not true.
During the session. Greg Hands.
My right honourable friend will be aware of the arbitrary 15-year rule that prevents Britons abroad from voting in UK elections. Will she recommit the government supporting our honourable friend, the member for Montgomeryshire's private members' bill, when it comes back to the House next week?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for making that point, and the government continues to support that bill and thinks it's the right thing to do.
Rizzy Cooper.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. On Sunday, the BBC reported that Interserve is likely to go into administration on Friday. Could the Minister say what steps he's taken to protect jobs and pensions should Interserve collapse?
Minister.
Well, as the honourable lady would expect, we keep under review the situation in relation to all of our strategic suppliers, and I can assure her that we will take appropriate contingency measures in respect of every strategic supplier.
Mrs. Pauline Latham.
Could the Minister tell us what discussions he's had with Cabinet colleagues on delivering more public services online?
Minister.
Well, we have to date already delivered almost 800 services online which are on gov.uk, and in addition to that, I regularly engage with ministerial colleagues, principally through the Digital ITF Implementation Task Force, which is chaired by my Right Honourable friend, the Culture Secretary.
Laura Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government claims it has lifted the pay cap and declared austerity over, but it seems this doesn't apply to its own employees. The lack of consultation on the civil service pay guidance is shameful. When will the Minister make it his policy to return to national pay bargaining?
Well, this government does not support national pay bargaining. It's been a step forward that we tailor pay to the needs of each individual department, but I engage with all trade unions as we set the overall delegated framework which applies to pay grades below the senior civil service.
Damien Moore.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the announcement from the Cabinet Office to reform the way that government contracts are awarded so they consider social impact, as my honourable friend made an assessment of these changes on social enterprises.
Excellent. Minister Dowden.
Well, my friend rightly raises the issue of social enterprises. That's why just earlier this week I made an announcement that we will be consulting on how to allow social enterprises to bid for a range of government contracts and set out a clear framework for them to do so. And I'm confident that we will be able to unlock the opportunities of the over 100,000 social enterprises we have in this country.
Jarvis.
Should private sector companies delivering public sector contracts be subject to the FOI?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we had a lengthy Westminster Hall debate on this last week. We are considering the Information Commissioner's report on this, but we think we are already supplying a lot of transparency information, and that is adequate.
Thank you. Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. John Barron. Number one, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in expressing our deepest shock and sadness at the news of the air crash in Ethiopia on Sunday. Our thoughts and prayers are with the families of all 157 that were on board, including the British nationals who were amongst the casualties. I've sent a personal message of sympathy to Prime Minister Abiy and extended an offer of UK assistance. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues, including my right honourable friend, the International Development Secretary, who very helpfully offered to teach me sign language. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. John Barron.
I'm sure all of us concur with the Prime Minister's remarks about the disaster in Ethiopia, and many of us recognise the Prime Minister's efforts to secure a deal. But given that we profitably trade with the majority of the world's GDP outside the EU on largely WTO no-deal terms, has the time not come to look beyond this Westminster, this Remain-dominated Westminster bubble, and for all of us to recognise that the default position of our votes to trigger Article 50 is that no deal is better than a bad deal, so that we can honour the referendum and leave the EU on the 29th of March.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it may be to the benefit of the House, and I'm sure people will recognise if I try and keep my answers shorter than usual today. Can I say to my honourable friend, I want to leave the European Union with a good deal. I believe we have a good deal. Yes, no deal is better than a bad deal, but have been working for us to leave on the 29th of March and leave with a good deal.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I absolutely concur with the Prime Minister's remarks about the disaster of the air crash in Ethiopia and indeed the earlier crash in Asia that affected the same aircraft. And could I also at this point commend the Civil Aviation Authority and the European Union for taking prompt action about the safety of the aircraft concerned. We need to ensure that all air passengers are as safe as they possibly can be. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been stubbornly declaring that the only choice is between her deal and no deal. Last night's vote finished off her deal. Tonight, she's not even showing the leadership to whip on no deal. Just a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister whipped her MPs against ruling out no deal. So how will she be voting tonight?
Prime Minister!
I'll be voting for the motion standing in my name.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Well, Mr. Speaker, there may well be other votes, and her Brexit strategy is clearly in tatters. Her deal has been twice rejected and is now dead. And she's not even asking her MPs to support her on it tonight. A couple of months ago, the Chancellor, who is here today, we'll hear from him later, reassured business leaders that the threat of a no-deal Brexit would be taken off the table, while the Business Secretary said a no-deal Brexit would be ruinous to the UK economy. Indeed, the government's own forecast suggests that no deal would knock 10% off the economy, damaging jobs and industry. Why is the Prime Minister still ambivalent about the outcome?
Prime Minister!
I say to the right honourable gentleman, I've been working for leaving the EU with a deal. Businesses and business organisations have been clear across the UK that they want MPs to back the deal. Yes, businesses worry about the uncertainty of Brexit, but there's one thing they worry about more, and that's a Corbyn government.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doesn't seem to understand. Her deal has been flatly rejected twice by this House by unprecedented majorities. And even this morning, the CBI has said that no deal would be, and I quote, a sledgehammer to the economy. And went on to say there has been no consultation with business, adding, this is no way to run a country. The reason her deal is now dead is because at every step of the way, the Prime Minister has refused to listen. Refused to listen to manufacturers, refused to listen to trade unions about the best way to protect jobs in this country, which is to agree a customs union. Manufacturing is now in recession. Many companies have laid off many workers. Her own deal has been decisively rejected. When will she listen to those workers who are concerned about their jobs, those businesses are concerned about their future, and accept the case there has to be a negotiated customs union with the EU?
Prime Minister.
When it comes to the CBI said that the Labour government's policies would lead to a drop in living standards. That's not very good for the people he claims to stand up and represent. But he talks about a customs union, which of course was part of proposals that he put forward. But it's yet another position that he's taken. He's moved to being in favour of a second referendum, but I note that last night he didn't actually refer to a second referendum. He's just spoken about a deal, about a customs union that's already been rejected, and actually, in the past, very often rejected by him.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, it would be rather reckless to rule out any option at the present time for the Prime Minister, I would have thought. I don't think her answer will help workers at Honda in Swindon, or those in Nissan in Sunderland, or many others that are very concerned about their future because of the danger to manufacturing industry. Mr. Speaker, Britain's food producers are also in despair. A coalition of UK food producers asked the Prime Minister to call for tariff-free access to the single market. With her red lines now in tatters, will she now back the view of UK food producers and back close alignment to the single market to secure their industry? After all, she promised at Chequers there would be frictionless trade.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that the deal that we have negotiated includes access to the European Union on the basis of no tariffs? Might help if he'd actually read it.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, it was a former DEFRA secretary, the member for North Shropshire, who was campaigning to leave in the referendum and actually said during that, and I quote, because it's not the kind of language I would use, only a madman would actually leave the single market. The Prime Minister has previously said you can't just reject no deal, you need to be for something. So with her own deal now so decisively rejected, can we be informed by the Prime Minister, what is she now for? Does she now recognise the Labour alternative, the 5 pillars we put forward, is the credible show in town, available and ready to be negotiated? Isn't it time she moved on from her red lines and faced the reality of the situation she has got herself, her party, this Parliament and this country into?
Prime Minister! The gentleman talks about not wanting no deal, yet repeatedly votes in a way that brings no deal closer. Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, the deal that he's proposing actually has been rejected several times by this House. I may not have my own voice, but I do understand the voice of the country. They want...
The House must calm itself. I want to hear what the Prime Minister has to say and what everybody has to say, and it should not be necessary for voices to be raised for a member to be heard. The Prime Minister.
And that is, people want to leave the EU, they want to end free movement, they want to have our own trade policy, they want to ensure laws are made in this country and judged in our courts. That's what the deal delivers. That's what I continue to work to deliver. He used to believe that too. Why is he just trying to frustrate it?
Jeremy Corbyn!
Speaker, I do have sympathy with the Prime Minister's voice, and I hope it soon recovers. I understand how painful this is. The Prime Minister's deal has failed. She no longer has the ability to lead. This is a rudderless government in the face of a huge national crisis. The honourable member for Broxbourne recognised it, saying, and I quote, "The government is not fit for purpose. We're not doing what we need to do, which is govern the country properly and effectively." Where the Prime Minister has so obviously failed, this House needs to listen to the country. Listen to unions, listen to people in work fearful for their future, manufacturers and businesses, workers and European Union citizens who've made such a fantastic contribution to our society, and British citizens across Europe, all facing uncertainty, jobs and industry at risk, the country in crisis. She needs now to show leadership. So can the Prime Minister tell us exactly what her plan is now?
The Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, I continue to believe that the House today will have an opportunity to vote on no deal. They will then have an opportunity tomorrow, depending on how they voted tonight, to vote on the question of the extension of Article 50. And as I said last night, there will be hard choices for this House, but this House will need to determine what its view is on the way forward. As far as the government is concerned, we want to continue to work to leave the European Union. That's what we deliver for the people on the vote of the referendum. We will continue to work to deliver leaving of the European Union, but to deliver leaving the European Union with a good deal. And as regards the right honourable gentleman, he doesn't agree with government policy. He doesn't even agree with Labour Party policy. He has nothing to offer this country.
Andrew Rosingale.
10 points behind. Mr. Speaker, the whole House will want to send its condolences to the families of the recent victims of knife crime, including the 17-year-old Jodie Chesney, who was tragically murdered in my borough of Havering. But when 2/3 of those carrying a knife escape custodial sentence, and when 1 in 5 repeat offenders avoid prison, what assurances will the Prime Minister give that we are serious about getting tough on knife crime? And does she understand why so many people are fed up with soft sentencing?
Can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, that I'm sure that members from across the whole House will want to join me in sending my deepest sympathies and condolences to the family and friends of Jodie. And I know there's nothing that we can do or say that is going to ease the pain that the family are going through at her loss. Can I say to my honourable friend that we are very clear that judges must have the powers they need to impose tough sentences on those involved in serious violence and knife crime. The law already provides for a mandatory prison sentence for a second offence of carrying a knife, and conviction of a knife or offensive weapon offence is now more likely to result in some form of custodial sentence and for longer than at any point in the last 10 years. Obviously, individual sentencing decisions are a matter for the courts, but we are catching and prosecuting more people who carry a knife. Those who are convicted are now more likely to go to prison and for longer. But as I set out in Prime Minister's questions last week, both I and the Home Secretary are working to see what more we can do to deal with the serious violence and the knife crime that has beset so many of our communities.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister of the tragedy in Ethiopia and the tragic loss of life? And of course, on this day we commemorate the sad loss of the 16 young children and their school teacher in Dunblane that were cruelly cut down by Thomas Hamilton. And of course that sanctity of young life is something that we remember today when we hear the news that the Honourable Member for Murray and his wife Crystal gave birth to a young son, and I'm sure the whole House will want to congratulate him. Mr. Speaker, a no deal will result in unprecedented harm. Does the Prime Minister really want to be the first Prime Minister in history to deliberately plunge the United Kingdom economy into recession?
First of all, can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, I'm pleased to add my congratulations to my honourable friend, the Honourable Member for Murray, and his wife on the birth of their son. Can I also say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House are with him in remembering the terrible events that took place in Dunblane and the terrible loss of young life that we saw when that happened. And then can I finally say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, he will of course hear the spring statement from my Right Honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, in a short time. I'm pleased to say that will show the strength of the United Kingdom economy, the strength of the United Kingdom economy of which Scotland is able to participate as a member of the UK.
Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, in 16 days, the United Kingdom runs the risk of crashing out of the European Union with a no deal. And we know from the government's own analysis that that will crash the economy. Why doesn't the Prime Minister show some leadership today, do the right thing, and whip all her MPs to take no deal off the table on the 29th of March and forever?
Prime Minister.
You can only take no deal off the table by doing one of two things. Revoke Article 50. Revoke Article 50, which means betraying the vote of the referendum, or agree a deal. If the Right Honourable Gentleman wants to take no deal off the table, he should have voted for the deal.
Whitewood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As our honourable friend, the member for Romford, said, nearly a fifth of people convicted for a second or subsequent time of possessing an illegal knife are spared a prison sentence. We would not accept this for firearm offences. Will the Prime Minister look again at sentencing guidelines and sentencing practice to ensure that anyone carrying an offensive weapon gets the sentence they deserve?
Well, again, I say to my honourable friend that I fully appreciate the concern that he and our honourable friend, the member for Rossendale, and others across this House have shown on this issue. The most recent statistics show that 82% of offenders received a custodial sentence for repeat possession offences. Obviously, as I said, sentencing decisions are a matter for the courts. But we do, as a government, regularly look at ensuring that the powers are there to ensure that tough sentences can be imposed on those who are involved in knife crime.
Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, some of the excellent head teachers in my constituency sent letters home with their pupils detailing to parents how their budgets have been slashed by 8% and they're struggling to make ends meet. They have asked on three separate occasions since September 2018 for a meeting with the Secretary of State for Education to discuss school shortages in Kent and have been refused. So can the Prime Minister please ask him to meet with Ms Spinks, Ms Hinds, Mr Wright, Mr Cooper, Ms Butcher, Ms Nope, Mr Pywell and others as a matter of urgency?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm sure I will ensure that ministers in the Department for Education have heard the request that the Honourable Lady has put forward. But just to remind her and members of this House, the school's budget this year is £42 billion. That is the highest school budget ever.
Order! Order! The Honourable Member for Yardley is usually advocating good and respectful behaviour, which she must now herself exemplify, notwithstanding her passion or insistence upon her point of view, in which she is not exceptional. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. School's budget is the highest ever this year, and we've given every local authority more money for every pupil in every school this year.
Mr. Peter Bow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the whole House could unite in agreeing that the Prime Minister has put an enormous amount of hard work and energy in trying to resolve the European Union issue. And we certainly wish her well and get better soon. Has the Prime Minister had the opportunity to look at Amendment F on the order paper today, proposed by my right honourable friend from Ashford, the former Deputy Prime Minister, signed by many Conservative Remainer MPs and Conservative Labour MPs, by the leader of the DUP and members of the Labour Party? I believe that, Mr. Speaker, would unite the Conservative benches and would the Prime Minister and attract support from the opposition benches. Prime Minister, have you had an opportunity to consider whether you would be able to support that amendment?
Can I say
Prime Minister?
To my honourable friend, and I'm grateful to my right honourable and honourable friends for the spirit in which they've sought to broker compromise in this House. The amendment has 4 propositions within it. The first is that we should publish our Day 1 tariff schedules. We've done so this morning. The second, that we should seek to extend the Article 50 process. We remain committed to giving the House the opportunity to debate and vote on this tomorrow. The third, that we should unilaterally guarantee the rights of EU citizens resident in the UK. I'm pleased to reconfirm that we have done this. And the fourth is to seek to negotiate an implementation period in return for a financial payment, but without the withdrawal agreement that we've agreed. The EU have made it clear there will be no agreement without a withdrawal agreement, and that includes what we've already negotiated on citizens' rights, a financial settlement and a Northern Ireland protocol. The plan that exists, that has been agreed, is obviously the deal that was put to the House and rejected by the House last night. But as I say, the EU have made clear that they would not accept elements of what is in the current withdrawal agreement without them being in a withdrawal agreement.
J. Platt.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, it will mark 40 years since the Goldborn mining disaster in the constituency of Lee. It's a disaster which saw the tragic death of 10 miners, which still reverberates throughout our community and affects the families of those involved. Will the Prime Minister send her support for